Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Javad Nehami and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, security forces and the Taliban have both claimed that they inflicted heavy casualties on the other in their latest attacks. An Afghan Defense Ministry statement said security forces killed at least 37 Taliban fighters in Kandahar on Sunday. For their part, the Taliban claimed killing several soldiers in Helmand and Ghazni, but they didn't comment on the Defense Ministry's statement. The two adversaries are expected to meet in Turkey later this month for the US-sponsored peace talks. India has reported a record-high daily surge in COVID-19 infections as over 100,000 people tested positive in a day. Pakistan has registered over 4,300 coronavirus cases and 43 deaths overnight, taking the tally over 14,800. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.8 million lives and infected over 131 million people so far. At least 113 people have died in floods and landslides triggered by tropical cyclone Seroja in eastern Indonesia and neighboring East Timor. Dozens of people are unaccounted for and thousands displaced after the cyclone brought strong winds and heavy rains over the weekend. In Myanmar, protesters clapped together in the latest show of dissent against the military as ASEAN prepares for the talks on the crisis that has killed over 560 people. No date has been given for the meeting that will be held at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. Myanmar plunged into chaos after the military seized power in February and arrested elected leaders. Mozambique's military says it has regained full control of the coastal town of Palma more than a week after it was raided by the militants. An army spokesman said several militants were killed in the counter-offensive. Dozens of civilians were killed and at least 11,000 displaced after the militants invaded Palma on the 24th of March. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, security forces and the Taliban have both claimed that they inflicted heavy casualties on the other in their latest attacks. An Afghan Defense Ministry statement said security forces killed at least 37 Taliban fighters in Kandahar on Sunday. For their part, the Taliban claimed killing several soldiers in Helmand and Ghazni, but they didn't comment on the Defense Ministry's statement. The two adversaries are expected to meet in Turkey later this month for US-sponsored peace talks. The US is pushing Kabul and the Taliban to finalize a peace deal at the proposed conference as the May 1 deadline looms for the withdrawal of the foreign troops. The deadline is part of a February 2020 agreement the US signed with the Taliban in Doha to end the longest war in the US history. India has reported the highest daily cases so far with more than 100,000 infections overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.8 million lives and infected 131 million others. More in this report.
As many countries are battered with a third wave of COVID-19, experts have already warned of a fourth one shortly. Top US infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says getting as many people vaccinated as possible in the shortest period is the only way to avoid another disaster. To ramp up the inoculation drive, the US has put Johnson & Johnson in charge of a plant that ruined 15 million vaccine doses. The country has also stopped the facility from producing the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Down south, Latin America, however, continues to face grim realities with little reassurance. Just over a week before voters go to the polls to elect a new president, Peru reported a record number of daily deaths. Colombia is set to extend coronavirus restrictions based on intensive care unit occupancy rates.
Tenemos claro.
It's clear that the epidemiological situation in some municipalities have shown increases in recent weeks, and there also exists the risk of a new national increase in coming weeks. We must act, prevent, and take appropriate decisions.
In England, under the new plans, people will be entitled to take a rapid test twice a week to prevent outbreaks and find asymptomatic cases. Portugal, meanwhile, has extended restrictions on travel to neighboring Spain until April 15th. In Thailand, tourism-dependent Phuket Island has embarked on a mass inoculation program 2 months before the rest of the country.
On July 1st, we will open the town for tourists. If we can build immunity for 70 to 80% of the population on the island, we can receive foreign tourists who have been vaccinated without the need for quarantine.
Over in Asia, China reported its highest daily surge in over 2 months as a city in southwestern Yunnan province accounted for all the 15 new local cases.
In Pakistan, the coronavirus has claimed 43 more lives in the last 24 hours. Health officials say more than 4,300 people tested positive overnight. Nationwide, the death toll has risen to 14,821. Pakistan has reported 692,000 confirmed cases since the pandemic began. So far, nearly 616,000 people have recovered from the disease. There are more than 61,000 active cases nationwide and nearly 3,600 patients are critical. Meanwhile, thousands of Pakistanis have rushed for inoculation after the commercial sale of COVID-19 vaccines began. The officials at the vaccination sites in the southern city of Karachi said the vaccines were already sold out. In another development, President Arif Alvi is chairing a virtual meeting regarding the SOPs during Ramadan. In Bangladesh, at least 26 people have died while several others are missing after a ferry sank in the Shitalaskaya River near the capital Dhaka. Police said the ship was en route to Munshiganj from Narayanganj district when it collided with a cargo vessel. Officials say the ferry was carrying around 50 passengers and some of them managed to swim ashore. The passengers were traveling to their hometown after the government announced a new COVID-19 lockdown. Search for the survivors continues after the rescue operations were hampered by a storm last night. Meanwhile, more than a dozen people have died after the first tropical storm of the season swept over different regions of the country. The death toll from flash floods and landslides in Indonesia and East Timor has exceeded 110. The Met Office has warned that more heavy rain is likely to hit the region today. Disaster management officials say 86 people have died, with dozens are still missing in the West Nusa Tenggara province. They added that nearly 30,000 people have been impacted by floods in Indonesia. The debris and extreme weather have hampered the search and rescue operation. Meanwhile, the Met Office says the cyclone will weaken in the next 2 days. China has warned the United States not to take a superior position and presume it has a final say on global affairs. Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the door for dialogue is open, but it must be based on equality and mutual respect. In an interview, Wang said Beijing will not accept any unilateral demands from Washington. He added China will take a confrontation calmly without any fear if the US continues on that road. Beijing's top diplomat reiterated China's right to defend its national sovereignty and dignity. In Myanmar, protesters clapped together in the latest show of dissent against the military as ASEAN prepares for talks on the crisis that has killed over 560 people. No date has been given for the meeting that will be held at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. More in this report.
Myanmar's military crackdown on anti-coup protesters has shown no signs of subsiding. But despite the violence, demonstrators have been coming out every day, often in small groups in small towns. Their movement has included street marches, a civil disobedience campaign of strikes and rebellious acts organized via social media. Additionally, the junta has sought to suppress the campaign by shutting down wireless broadband and mobile data services. Regional countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines have expressed alarm over the killings of demonstrators, while the U.S. and other Western countries have called for the release of detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Myanmar plunged into chaos after the military seized power in February and arrested elected leaders. The coup and subsequent crackdown has led to Western sanctions on the military and its lucrative businesses.
A Malaysian court is hearing former Prime Minister Najib Razak's appeal to annul his conviction in the infamous 1MDB scandal. The appeal proceedings are set to run until 22nd of April. Najib, who co-founded 1MDB, was found guilty of laundering $10 million from the state fund. He was sentenced to 12 years in jail and a $50 million fine. The conviction brought down his government in 2018. Najib's lawyers termed his conviction a mistrial and maintained that he did not know about the transactions into his accounts. Jordan's estranged Prince Hamza says he will not obey the army's orders restricting his movement and communication. The former crown prince said this in an audio message released by the country's opposition. Prince Hamza was put under house arrest after the military warned him of actions it said were undermining security and stability in Jordan. The government has also detained 16 others after accusing them of conspiring with foreign elements to destabilize the country. Jordan's neighbors and allies have expressed solidarity with King Abdullah bin Al Hussein over the security measures in the kingdom. Mozambique's military says it has regained full control of the coastal town of Palma over a week after it was raided by the militants. An army spokesperson says a significant number of Al-Shabaab militants were killed in the counter-offensive. Dozens of civilians were killed and at least 11,000 displaced after the militants invaded Palma late last month. The UN also suspended flights to evacuate civilians because of security concerns. Meanwhile, state radio reported that residents who had fled were starting to return to their homes. In Sudan, 18 people have been killed and 54 others injured in tribal clashes in Al Geneina city. The incident is the latest in the troubled region since the signing of a peace agreement late last year and the withdrawal of the UN peacekeepers. In January, at least 129 people were killed and military reinforcements were brought into the city. But local officials say they have since largely withdrawn. In October, the transitional Sudanese government signed a peace agreement with some of the rebel groups that had fought ousted President Omar al-Bashir. However, attacks by members of Arab tribes have escalated, leading to tribal clashes in heavily armed region. Foreign ministers from Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan have started fresh negotiations over the Nile Dam dispute in Democratic Republic of Congo. The dispute over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam built across the Blue Nile has been simmering for nearly a decade. Addressing the opening session, African Union Chairman Felix Tshisekedi urged all the parties to launch a new dynamic to resolve the dispute. Meanwhile, Egypt's foreign minister also called the meeting the last chance to relaunch talks on the project. Ethiopia has said it will fill the dam after seasonal rains starting this summer. However, both Sudan and Egypt insist on the mandatory filling of the reservoir. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Russia says it is in contact with the United States at the highest level over the situation in Ukraine. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow has assured Washington that there is no cause for concern. He said the U.S. must not focus on what Russia allegedly does, but on the unacceptable behavior of Kiev. This comes as the Kremlin said that Russian military movements near its shared border with Ukraine posed no threat to Ukraine or anyone else. The EU has expressed serious worries over Russian troop movement and pledged support for Kiev. The military build-up by Russia along the Ukraine border has sparked global concerns over a possible all-out armed conflict. Russia has extended a deadline for Twitter to remove illegal content by a month to mid-May. The decision comes after the social media giant started cooperating when Russia slowed down its operations. Earlier, Russia's state telecommunications watchdog accused Twitter of failing to remove content related to child pornography and drug use. It gave Twitter a month to remove the content or face a complete blockage in Russia. The move raised concerns among Kremlin critics who fear the clampdown on Twitter is aimed at silencing opposition voices. The European Union has termed the departure of all foreign fighters from Libya as a precondition to the country's stability. European Council's President Charles Michel urged the Libyan factions to seize the unique opportunity to build a sovereign and stable country. Michel made the remarks after a meeting with Libya's Prime Minister-designate Abdul Hamid Dibeibe in Tripoli. The Council's President said the European Union actively supports the process of national reconciliation in Libya. He also pledged bloc support for Libya in the areas of economic recovery, elections and fight against illegal immigration. The foreign ministers of France, Germany and Italy have also visited Tripoli recently in a show of support for Libya's newly formed unity government. Israeli authorities have jailed 230 Palestinian children since the beginning of this year. In a report released on a local Children's Day, the Palestinian Prisoners Society said the arrests were concentrated in the occupied city of Jerusalem. The Palestinian Children's Day is celebrated on April the 5th to raise awareness on the plight of the Palestinian children. The rights group that monitors the conditions of detainees in Israeli prisons said the imprisoned children are subjected to various forms of abuse. It said the misconduct includes denying food and drink for long hours, verbal abuse and detainment under harsh conditions. Meanwhile, Defense for Children International said 85% of the children arrested last year suffered physical violence. Palestine's election board has approved a list of 36 candidates to run in the legislative elections scheduled for May. The vote is part of an effort by the Palestinian movements Fatah and Hamas to boost international support for governance. President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah dominates the Palestinian Authority in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, Hamas has run the Israeli blockaded Gaza Strip since 2007. The first parliamentary polls in 15 years will be held on July the 31st. In Israel, a district court has resumed hearing the corruption cases against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. At the opening of the latest hearing, state prosecutors accused Netanyahu of illegitimate use of power and using favors as currency. They said Netanyahu sought improper benefits from owners of major media in Israel for personal gains. Netanyahu, who denies wrongdoing in all the three cases, left the courthouse before the first witness was called to testify. This comes as Israel deals with another political deadlock, with no party having a clear majority to form the government. The president is meeting parliamentarians in a bid to resolve the impasse. A once-secret unit within the Guantanamo Bay detention center has been closed and the prisoners moved to another facility. In a statement, the U.S. Southern Command says the prisoners at Camp 7 were transferred to a nearby facility. It added that the move is part of an effort to increase operational efficiency and effectiveness. The Southern Command said the Camp 7 prisoners were moved to Camp 5 safely and without incident. Among those held at Camp 7 were the 5 prisoners charged with war crimes for their alleged roles in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. President Joe Biden has said he intends to close Guantanamo, but that would require approval from Congress. In the United States, tens of thousands of New Yorkers took to the streets to protest against racism and violence targeting Asian Americans across the country. The march along streets of Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge comes as the largest to be staged in New York so far. Organizers say around 500 groups joined the march. The protesters called for an end to hate crimes and racial discrimination, which they say have peaked recently. They also demanded protection of rights of Asians and minorities across the U.S. Apart from Asians, the demonstrators also included groups of other ethnic minorities.
Hate for anyone is hate for all, you know, and I just want us all to kind of live together and coexist, and I feel like there should be no negativity between anyone. And I feel the Black community and the Asian community, we have our own, you know, beef from before, but we need to put that aside so that we can come together to fight for our lives.
Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov's centre-right JER party is set to win the most seats in Sunday's parliamentary elections. Data from the Central Electoral Commission shows Borisov's party is in the lead, but it may struggle to muster a majority. With two-thirds of ballots counted, Borisov leads with 25.6% votes as the largest party in the next parliament. But he could find it hard to build a coalition after anger over corruption scandals weighed in on his showing. The new anti-establishment party, There Is Such a People, is running second with 18.3% votes. It is followed by the opposition Socialists with 14.9%. The anti-graft centre-left coalition of Democratic Bulgaria and Stand Up Mafia Out have mustered up 15.3% of the vote. Environmental degradation is undoubtedly the most threatening global challenge of the coming years. An Indonesian environmental activist has taken up the task to prepare coming generations for this challenge using puppet stories. Details in this report.
Wearing a hat shaped as the head of the critically endangered Javan rhino and carrying a box labeled fairy tales in local language, Samsudin visits villages to teach children about environmental degradation using puppet stories. His fairy tales are particularly centered on the threat of coastal erosion and how mangrove trees can be used to counter it. The 50-year-old environmentalist has recently brought his puppet show to Indramayu, one of the areas in the country most severely affected by land erosion amid loss of mangrove swamps.
Fungsi mangrove satu adalah
one of the functions of mangroves is that it can act as a barrier to the strong waves from the ocean when it grows up. So waves will not destroy the land, as there can be a lot of damage on land caused by those big waves.
Based on the satellite images, nearly 90% of the entire 114-kilometer coastline of Indramayu has suffered from erosion. Also, around over 6,000 hectares of land is now flooded by seawater due to an encroaching shoreline. Samsudin's team of environmentalists are complementing the efforts by planting young saplings in areas which used to be covered by mangrove trees, but replanting is an uphill battle.
itu medianya itu kan harus.
The mangrove planting zone must be located in a coastal tidal area. But the coastal areas in Indramayu are rarely exposed to both high or low tides, because mostly we get high tides. And as such, it is very difficult to plant because there is no sedimentation.
As per the Peatland and Mangrove Restoration Agency, over 600,000 hectares of Indonesia's 3.3 million hectares of mangrove are in critical condition. Meanwhile, the country's forestry ministry's data shows that over 1.8 million hectares of mangroves in Indonesia were damaged.
In other business updates, the U.S. stocks have climbed to record highs as investors cheered a strong bounce in job growth amid accelerating vaccine rollout. The tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite traded more than 1% higher at open. The Dow Jones Index also opened more than 1% higher, whereas the S&P 500 traded fractionally higher at open. Meanwhile, the oil prices dropped after OPEC Plus agreed to ease output cuts. LG Electronics has announced its complete withdrawal from the mobile business after years of money-losing performance. The decision comes amid intensifying competition with bigger rivals. South Korean tech powerhouse says its mobile communications unit will not produce and sell handsets after July the 31st. In a regulatory filing, the company said the move will lead to a decline in revenue in the short term. However, it will eventually improve financial status and management efficiency in the long run. LG's mobile business has been in the red since 2015, with accumulated operating losses reaching $4.4 billion last year. In football, Manchester United have edged closer to a top four finish by beating Brighton and Hove Albion 2-1 in their English Premier clash. United are in second place with 60 points, 14 behind leader Manchester City. More in this report.
Marcus Rashford and Mason Greenwood netted one each to secure the win for United. Meanwhile, Aston Villa defeated Fulham 3-1 to ascend to 9th place with 44 points. The loss further dampens Fulham's survival hopes in the league as it remains in the relegation zone. In other fixtures, Southampton edged Burnley 3-2, while Newcastle and Tottenham drew 2-2. Meanwhile, Sevilla recovered from an early penalty miss to stun La Liga leaders Atletico Madrid 1-0 at home. Sevilla's win has extended a lifeline to title challengers Barcelona and Real Madrid. Despite the loss, Atletico topped the standings with 66 points, 3 clear of second place Real Madrid. Third place Barcelona will move 1 point behind Atletico if they beat Real Valladolid on Monday.
In golf, Thailand's Apeti Tawatanakit has won the ANA Inspiration in Rancho Mirage, California. Tawatanakit shot a 4-under 68 to become the first rookie to win the Inspiration since 1984. The 21-year-old rookie finished at 18 under for the event. Tawatanakit chipped in for eagle on par 5, second hole, and added birdies on holes 8 and 12. She outlasted a furious charge by New Zealand's Lydia Ko, who finished second at 16 under. Tawatanakit is also the first LPGA player to make the Inspiration her first career victory. In the National Basketball Association, Chicago Bulls have snapped a 6-game losing streak by beating Brooklyn Nets 115 to 107 points at home. The victory has once again breathed life into Chicago's playoff hopes. Zach LaVine finished with a game-high 25 points for the Bulls, followed by Thomas Satoransky's 19. The Nets looked lethargic and out of sync, playing without James Harden and Kevin Durant. Meanwhile, Los Angeles Clippers clobbered the Lakers 104 to 86. Marcus Morris led the charge for the Clippers with 22 points, while Kawhi Leonard added 19. In other contests, the Boston Celtics dominated the Charlotte Hornets 116 to 86, while the Atlanta Hawks defeated Golden State Warriors 117 to 111. Weather in the UK is swinging side to side from inconveniently warm for the Brits to snowing. Snow fell in parts of Britain less than a week after a heat wave. Eyewitness footage shows snow falling in Hertford, a village in England's Cambridgeshire and Scotland's Braemar. Met officials say the colder weather stems from a change of wind direction. Media reports said the temperature dropped to -5 degrees Celsius, with parts of the UK set to see the mercury fall to as low as -7. This came after the UK Weather Office reported a heat wave, with the temperature rising to 24 degrees. Wednesday, March 31, was recorded as the hottest day in 53 years in the region. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.